Hello, Harry here. We produce podcast episodes and videos to connect people through a love of running and adventure. Currently at 5.2 million views, go check out the Jog On YouTube channel as well. You can also find the Jog On running kit at thisisjogon.com. Adam Bevington has had a crazy few years. Life was going very well for Adam until, in his mid-30s, something went very wrong.
It would literally be wake up in the morning, try and get out of bed, see what that's going to be like.
Struck down with pain and climbing towards 140 kilograms in weight, Adam was not only on crutches and struggling to get around, but no one could understand quite what was happening to his body.
That was a complete unknown to me.
It was at this point he knew.
It's time to change.
This is an incredible story that I hope you get a lot from. So please, welcome to Jog On, Adam Bevington. To rewind you to, let's call it the early days of your running journey, just take me right back to that initial step into running. Did you run at school at all?
So I didn't run specifically at school as a discipline, although kind of played various sports that involve kind of being fit, and sort of running was something that we did to keep fit, but nothing that was purely running, football, cricket, hockey type sports at school.
And were you a sporty kid? Did you enjoy that stuff, or did it come naturally to you at all?
So I was an outdoorsy kid. I don't think I'd necessarily say I was particularly sporty, although it just translated into wanting to be outdoors and play sport. I enjoyed sport in much as being competitive, more so than kind of mainly probably for the pure sport side of things. So outdoorsy, but not excelling at any particular sport, just sort of middle of the road and enjoying sport at school.
And moving through teenage years and into 20s, we know classically the PE lessons stop, and classically some kids run away with the sport. Where were you at? Did you drop off after school? Were you much particularly active in your early 20s?
So I think probably it all dropped off going to university, really, sort of not having that structure around, like you said, to go to a class or to be involved in sport in that way. And I think it sort of faded off, other than the, Sunday morning kickabout in the park, occasional runs with friends who are much more enthusiastic about running than I would have been at the time, and sort of going to the gym infrequently, but nothing that was sort of at the forefront of what I was doing particularly.
And your sort of first exploration then into running is a bit treadmill based, I know you'd mentioned. Was that kind of like a weight loss, sort of inspired by weight loss?
Yeah, I think getting to my early 30s, sort of working for 10 years, sort of not really doing any sport particularly, not really looking after myself. So kind of running came as a wanting to look better or feel better, I suppose. And it completely, as you said, treadmill based, sign up to a gym, turn up for an hour a day or whatever it might be, probably more pressing buttons on machines than actually doing much particularly. But that developed into sort of realizing that actually if I do put a bit of effort into this, I can get something out of it, feeling fitter, losing weight. And so that's sort of where that came from. But it was very compartmentalized into treadmill running. Although at some point I realised, I could probably try and run in a race, translated that to running outside. But really running outside was sort of the thing that I did the most infrequently. I would only do it if I'd signed up to a race or something. So yeah, very, very kind of treadmill. And I hadn't really kind of fully what I would sort of embrace why I love running now, being outside and all those things.
So maybe that connection comes a little bit later. As you started to run a bit more outside, and I know you finally attend a park run, I think Alice Holt was where it kind of began for you. Yeah. Was there an early kind of passion that started to develop there where you sort of thought, this is quite fun actually, I'm running through the woods right now, and being an outdoorsy person, did you start to make those connections that, I can run outdoors and it can be quite a fun activity?
Yeah, and I think, and I don't know whether this is just my non-involvement in social media or I didn't really know that Parkrun existed outside of Alice Holt Parkrun. So when I got taken along by a friend who said, there's this thing called Parkrun, I went to Alice Holt, ran up and down some hills and thought, this is actually quite good fun. It's quite hard, but it's quite good fun. But as you said, I did Alice Holt and thought, actually these woods are fun to run through. Then I incorporated that into my training because I thought, I'll just go and run the Parkrun course in the middle of the week, but not really inquisitively doing any other running outdoors. That was sort of, Alice Holt was the place I went to run, or on the treadmill.
And then over time, does that do you start to notice improvements? Is there a bit of motivation there that you are actually noticing? You talked about realizing that there's improvement. Is there a little bit of weight loss? Is there an actual looking at the parkrun time and going, okay, that was quicker than 2 weeks ago? Does that become a little bit addictive yet, or not that strong?
I think it was so far from my mentality that
Yeah.
I sort of didn't really care about what the time was. So getting to the end of the park run and enjoying it to a degree was all I don't think I even checked my results particularly for a long while. It wasn't really only when I started to think about, well, maybe I'd like to do a 10K or a half marathon. And then really I looked up times because I thought, oh, would I be able to even finish in time for the event not to be packed up and everyone gone home? So I had to think, right, well, how long would it take me to do one of those things? And then you start thinking, well, actually, if I did it in that time, could I do it 5 minutes or 1 minute or 2 minutes quicker next time? But there wasn't a timed goal. I wasn't trying to get under a certain threshold. It's sort of just, everyone talks about when they first start running, lots of PBs just happen every week in, week out. And that was, for me, it was just happening because I was losing a few kilos here and there. I was probably eating more healthily because that's what my body desired rather, your body naturally starts to want to eat more healthily as you get into more physical activity. So probably those things accumulated to my times tumbling, but it wasn't something that I could say to you, oh, in 2017 I knocked 5 minutes off my PB. That's just not kind of in my mind. It wasn't at the time.
But that's quite nice. I think that so often people who start out running, there's such a landscape now of times being important to people that people often don't realize when you're a total beginner, you can almost throw those out the window and just learn to enjoy the experience and just get used to like the feeling of it as your body's starting to strengthen up and things like that. And it's almost nice to go through a phase of just not being worried at all about the time and just being there for the experience. And then as you get better, if you'd like to lean into that as a sort of a yardstick or a measure of how your improvement is, then you can. But obviously it does get shoved down your throat, myself included. Like these times are so important to people who've been running for a while. As a beginner, I could see why someone could come in and go, oh, I need to achieve or sort of judge themselves based on a time, which absolutely they shouldn't do when they first go. So I think it's probably quite a positive thing that you were just there to get around and just enjoy it, really.
Yeah, and I think that when I talk to people now, and I don't know whether it's just because there's lots more running content out there and times are more prevalent talking about them. When we talk about jog on, we talk about going out for a run, I talk to people enthusiastically about running and they say to me, well, what should I be able to do a 5K in? There isn't an answer to that.
Exactly.
It's like enjoy it, get around it, walk, jog, run, doesn't really matter. And that did mean that actually for that first period of running, I didn't have to put any pressure on myself, and that probably actually self-fulfilled itself because I carried on doing it because I didn't feel a huge amount of pressure. And I do see in other people, and it worries me, this constant wanting to get faster, and I think, well, actually, if you just do it more consistently, you'll enjoy it more, and that's sort of the point, really.
And I think you have to find your own path, and different people enjoy running differently. Some people, for example, are not bothered about ever joining and running with a club, and they love the solo running, and for them, they have such a busy life and they're around people every day. Actually, for them, going out by themselves is wonderful. And there's others I've met who almost need to be held accountable and to meet a group, and they love the social element of it. And I think over time you start to realize that running, while it is this one entity, it can look very different in different people's lives and how that fits in. And I think that's a good example of it, of how bothered you are about times, for example, whether you're just there to enjoy it.
I think there's sort of all ingredients in the mixture. And I know lots of people that don't run in clubs, and I didn't for a long time, or run with other people even, or like I said, even run outside. I think there's an important mix, and I think you sort of need a little bit of all of it. You need to sort of know a bit about what your time is, just because it's good to keep an eye on that. It's good to run with people from time to time. It's also good for your mental health to run on your own, have a bit of time to yourself to think through the problems of the day or the things that you're wanting to process. And it's just which one you, like you said, which one you lean into more is sort of how you feel that month, that year, that day, whatever it might be. But all of those ingredients kind of, I think, are important to having a healthy relationship with any type of sport or pastime that you do.
Massively, and also to be consistent with it and let it carry on for a while. We talked about parkrun and 5K and staying within this sort of the early phase of the first phase of Adam running, if you want to call it that. You do actually move up. You take on a 10K and eventually work your way up to Bournemouth half marathon.
Yeah.
What was Bournemouth half marathon like? Because that must have been a different experience. You think, I'm actually going for a half marathon at this point. What was the motivation to do that?
So leading up to, and I can't remember what runs I might have done before that, but leading up to half marathon was really treadmill based. So it was me looking at numbers, going, golly, could I, going from 10K to then 15K and then, okay, so now I could run 20K on the treadmill. But I didn't really test that outside of a gym. So that was a complete unknown to me. I'd never been to an organised race, didn't know what to expect. There was quite a lot of people there, and then bumped into a few people. It was raining at the time, so we'd gone into the local sports hall to pin our numbers on our tops, and I had no idea how to do any of that stuff. And some very nice people helped me out, and we all shared pens and wrote our telephone numbers for medical, and all that on the back of the thing, and sort of had a little friendship group there. Then when we started out running, actually ended up running with, which is really lovely, and I think a really great experience, because I had no idea of what time I could get, particularly because I knew what it would be on a treadmill, but I had no idea how that translates to the outside. I had no real need to go at any particular pace. It was just more having fun, and which meant I could chat to people as I went along. I could enjoy the entertainment that had been put on by the event organisers. Finishing it was the fun. So it was sort of untested training that just took me into an outside run. But I think that was a moment when I realised, okay, right, so I can actually get quite good on my own. I can actually get to the point where I can run a half marathon, which is sort of, I guess, most people haven't done in general day-to-day life.
Absolutely.
And then that kind of, I guess, spurred me on to think about what other challenges that I might be able to do.
Wow. And was that experience, just to sum up, was it an exhilarating experience? Was it hard? And you thought, were there moments during it where you thought, why am I doing this? Or was it generally a very positive race?
It was really windy. And so that was and obviously I'd never really experienced wind in my running. So that was kind of a new thing. And I may be looking through it with rose tinted glasses, but I remember it being very fun.
Yeah, great.
Chatting to loads of people. And as I think, we all experience that runner's high, even during a race. And I get that sort of after about 10K, I have this sort of, most runs, I have this sort of like moment of enjoyment. And actually I used that to chat to lots of people. And this chap ran past me with no shoes on. And I thought, that's very interesting. I need to go and talk to you. Mm. So I ran and chatted to him for a while and asked how you run without shoes, and met lots of people with little interesting stories along the way. So yeah, I remember it being very joyful experience for myself. Yeah.
So really you're on quite an upwards trajectory. To then be completing a half marathon must have been quite exhilarating. But then the crazy thing about your story, Adam, is we have this kind of strange period where you start to experience some pain. So just sort of take me to the onset of that. What's the very first realization that something's not quite right? When did the pains begin in your feet?
So I think coming off the back of the half marathon, I thought, well, I'm going to train a bit more seriously now. And I'm going to do I'll do 10K a day, sort of 5 days a week, and that will start to get my distance up, and I can start thinking about possibly a marathon or possibly more half marathons. And sort of almost immediately, I started getting what you could classify as kind of tendonitis feeling in my feet, and which I did all the things that we hit, rest, and my mum's a physio, so I asked her, and she said, we'll just rest for a few days or a week or so. And actually what I noticed is that more days than not, I would have quite severe pain in my feet. And I ended up going to the doctor on quite a few occasions. And actually in the first instance, I got told I was running too much. It could have been part of the aggravation, but actually I don't think it was particularly helpful feedback at the time. And considering only at the time I had lots of friends who were running far longer distances on a daily basis, I thought, well, sort of 6 miles doesn't sound like a huge amount to be doing.
You're not 100 miling weeks like you're
5 times, but it didn't seem like a huge amount. But I think that often you have to find someone in a clinician that sort of understands that a bit, and I hadn't really found that. From there, really, I had to sort of stop my running or slow it down a lot more, do a lot less, and try and fit it in. And then it got to the point where I think I mentioned to you, which is where I really couldn't even walk on some days. That was pretty tricky to sort of go from that high of thinking, golly, I've learned how to run, to this, well, now I'm struggling to even walk. And has this whole thing been because I'm running? Or, it's you have to be I was very introspective about what was going on. And that wasn't a very healthy place for me to be mentally.
I was going to say, does that take a toll mentally? It must just, after a few days of that, let alone weeks and weeks on end of it, it must get quite depressing. I
think pretty depressing. And as a relatively young person going into sort of hospital appointments on crutches, and that felt quite a debilitating thing.
Very debilitating. For context, what age were you when this began?
Golly,
you mid-30s?
Mid-30s, that would be, mid-30s.
Which is incredibly young for what it turned out to be. But, So you start going to hospital appointments, and then, I mean, it sounds like they sort of just don't really quite work out. It sort of just goes undiagnosed, really. You can't really figure out what it is. And what you said to me is that then, is it fair to say maybe as a coping strategy or a little bit of like the sort of being a bit fed up with this, you're leaning more into the social side again and move back away from the physical activity?
Yeah, I think it was very easy. It's one of those things I think that humans tend to do, which is kind of slightly hit the self-destruct button when something isn't quite going their way. And that's, in this life, it's very easy to find yourself going out 4 or 5 times a week for dinners and drinks and whatever with your friends. And that really is what I then did, lent into that kind of social side of things. And running sort of very quickly became a thing that happened in the past that I couldn't really do. And, on top of the fact that I had this pain every day. Yeah, I think that it's way far from any fitness and weight gain, and we'll probably talk about that. But yeah, certainly that very quickly happened. I think that when I was running, you're consuming lots of calories. You're very used to having to consume lots of calories, and then suddenly you stop running. Well, I'm still used to consuming lots of calories. Didn't check in with myself, as we said, leading into the kind of going out and socializing part. And so that very quickly ramped up for me in terms of weight.
And absolutely, I think the desire, you talked about the desire for slightly more nutritional foods somehow comes to you a little bit more naturally as you start running, because it's kind of this cyclical thing. It's sort of an upward spiral. Perhaps that spiral begins to get reversed because you're not running. So what's the point in, making a slightly healthier choice? So when this is happening and the weight starts to go on, do you feel like there wasn't a real strong awareness of like, was there a voice going, I probably shouldn't be doing this and I should get back on and try and work out what this is and I miss the running days? Or is it, do you just kind of switch that off, that voice a little bit, and do you kind of put the blinkers up a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. I think that is it a survival thing? It's very easy to sort of ignore the problem, right? And the blinkers go up and that you consume your life in doing something else. I don't think there was that much of a voice going on in the back of my head going, oh, you need to change. Because I think if that had been going on, I might have changed, or at least persevered with trying to find out what was wrong. I think that when you get told by multiple consultants and you get pushed back, there's a tendency to go, well, what more can I really do to try and find out what's going on? Maybe they're right, and maybe I just can't run again. And yeah, I think the blinkers are up and just carried on with my life without that in it, sadly.
So what eventually becomes the thing that makes you start to turn and makes you think, I need to sort this? Does the pain become so debilitating? Is there a slight mindset shift? What happens that leads to you talked about being wheeled in?
Yeah.
Just talk us up to that. What was that turning point?
Yeah, so the weight made the pain worse. At that point, I was between crutches sort of 3 to 4 days a week, I'd have said, probably a wheelchair one day a week, maybe.
Wow.
And which was really tricky mentally, also just practically, it's quite a difficult thing. I re-engaged with the NHS in terms of trying to look for a solution, and was wheeled in a wheelchair, not being able to walk, by my father, who at the time was early 70s. And you think, a moment happened there for me, which coincided, a very kind of negative moment happened for me, which was being pushed into a consulting room by my dad. At the time was, I think, because I was weighed that day, I know, which lots of people don't have the luxury of knowing that when they're really big, because no one wants to weigh themselves. Yeah. But I think I was 22 stone. So wow. My 7-year-old dad was pushing a 32 stone, 30-something-year-old.
Which I looked up, by the way, for context, is 140 kilograms.
Yeah,
that's what 22 stone is, which is amazing.
I sat there in front of this consultant, and the consultant at the time, who is still the person that looks after me now, said, well, I understand what's going on here. And part of it is that he diagnosed me very quickly from seeing that I had a bit of psoriasis on my skin.
So he recognised these symptoms.
Yeah, so I think I must have been wearing shorts or something where he saw some of my skin, and he said, oh, okay. And then I told him the story, and he said, oh, you didn't have tendinitis. It's actually kind of early onset arthritis, and we need to do some tests. But actually, I think, with the new drugs that are out these days, we probably could manage this. And rightly so, and I'm very grateful for him to do this. He also said, but there are other factors here at play, and those are the weight, health, and those types of things. So we made a little pact there together. He said that he would sort of bid on my behalf to make sure that we got the right medication, and we got to a point where I would be able to be free from wheelchair and crutches. And I said to him, well, I used to run, so I will lose all of this weight and I will do a run, and I will do long runs, and I will come back and talk to you about how that's going. And so there and then we sort of shook hands on that. And sort of, I think, as I said, both from a negative and a positive day, that was the real kind of turning point to address it and start fixing what was going on.
What was the emotion like of having that one conversation? When we talked about before, I knew you used the word relief, but there must have been a lot that was kind of almost built up and bottled up to that point. To have someone sitting in front of you, not only telling you, well, this is probably the issue, but also saying, we probably can do something about that. What did that feel like to be told that?
Yeah, it's difficult to believe when you're sat there and you've been through all of these things and you don't really understand medicine yourself and all of those things. But to have someone at least on my side, I thought, well, gosh, this is the first time I felt like that. It was great relief, or met with, a whole bunch of trepidation that actually I couldn't just sit there and talk about it. It's very easy to sit there and talk about changing and doing all these other things. But I'd said, try and give me this medication, and therefore I've got to do these other things. And it felt quite real as well at the time, that I'd actually committed to this consultant and myself maybe, more importantly, that actually it's time to change. So it was mixed emotions, but kind of positive, exhilarating as well.
Wow. It's interesting you paint the image as well of your own father wheeling you in. There's something quite powerful about that the person that is meant to be, it's almost a role reversal, isn't it? We see ourselves as starting as our parents' age, that we're the ones that become a little bit more of the care providers. And yet you've got this stark contrast of the mid-30s being rolled in by someone in their 70s. I can see why that's sort of quite a powerful moment for you, going, this is my own dad wheeling me in. I can see how that's must make quite an impact. That's an amazing image in a way. From there, Adam, obviously it's not just like, then I started punching meat and the sort of the Rocky Balboa cutscene. What's the journey like from there? Is there a sort of a new focus, and you start to, because first of all, you can't just instantly just go out I'll go out for my first run, because you're not in a state to actually do that. So what is the journey, and how does it go with testing the drugs first of all?
So I think we fairly immediately, I can't remember the time lapse, we fairly immediately got on some pain medication and the start of the trial of trying different drugs to combat the arthritis. And also the enthusiasm to want to change gave me the ability to want to get out and do something different. But we look back on this sometimes, and I remember walking around a kilometre loop and being really pleased with myself that I'd kind of got around that loop. But I can look back on that sort of a bit churdishly now, but actually that was the beginning of getting out and starting to move, which I think is the most important message when you talk about these things, is actually you don't have to go and run 5K. You don't have to run any Ks, just getting out and
putting one foot in front of the other, really,
completely. And then starting to realise, there are interesting things to go and look at. There are nice views to get to, and that can be your motivation as well. So we went through that process of trying drugs, and some were better than others. Some, make you feel ill and make you feel drowsy or tired. And there are things you can't take for various reasons. At the same time, I was still going through lots of tests because the drugs have various different implications on things like your liver and kidneys. So lots of blood tests quite a lot of the time, and trying to find the right drug. And it didn't happen particularly quickly. Probably only every 3-6 months was I actually being able to engage with my consultant. However, I think we came to a point where he decided that I was the right sort of candidate for a new type of immunosuppressant drug, which would require going through some funding at the Health Trust.
Partly because of cost?
Because of cost, yeah. So they're not, they want to exhaust, understandably, they want to exhaust the other options first, which can feel rather frustrating when there's a thing out there, but equally sort of, I think we're playing the long game at this point.
You've got to jump through those hoops to get there. And
absolutely. Eventually getting to the point where I was put on this immunosuppressant drug, which you're sort of striving to get onto these programs. And then when it actually happens, and we've spoken about this before, I was faced with you now have to inject yourself sort of every 4 weeks. And I'm not a major fan of needles, and having to inject oneself and have these blood tests on a fairly regular basis was also daunting.
It was called Taltz.
Yeah, so the drug is called Taltz, and it's not a hugely used drug, I don't think, at the moment in the UK. Had some really good write-ups from its use, I think, in America. And it was almost immediate. I guess it brings down the inflammation pretty instantly. But within 2 weeks of the first injection, pain was almost gone. As managing it a little bit with some pain medication, but pretty much realized. And after the second round of injections, I was like, oh, okay, this is it, which was incredibly exciting, because then I started thinking about exercising more and thinking about, right, actually, can we now put a plan in place to lose? And at this time, whilst I'd been eating healthily and I hadn't really been able to move a huge amount because of the pain and still, having to use crutches, that actually I'd probably dropped about 2 stone. And so I was still about 20 stone. And right, now I need to get out and start running, going back to where I was before and kind of making that weight change.
Wow. I mean, what it gives you, I guess, is options.
Yeah.
And there's an element of you can be as excited and exhilarated and relieved as you want in a consultant's office as they're telling you we probably should be able to do this. But really, maybe it takes the actual real world implication of actually seeing yourself be injected and actually feeling the benefit for you to start to believe in that and go, oh, no, there is a new chapter now that does look positive. So that must have been sort of a second layer of relief and all those emotions again of being like, oh, this is going to work for me. That must have been exciting that time to go, I've got a potential solution here.
Yeah, no, it was definitely very exciting. And it was sort of the beginning of 2022, first few months of 2022. So, I had various holidays that I planned. And I thought, well, it would be jolly nice to be feeling a lot lighter for those, be fitter. And so it was actually really, really good fun to start laying those plans down to put in place.
Are you at a point now where you've kind of got used to the injections as someone who also shares, I've never been great with injections, as we've talked about, and can completely empathize with that, over just the repetition of doing it? Do you get better at doing that?
No, not particularly.
Still terrible.
Yeah, still terrified. Still don't do it myself. And actually, I did an injection last night, and it's a mental thing. I think we've spoken about this before. The pain is really minimal, and I'd like to say to anybody who may go through kind of a medication that they need to have injections, it's not all that terrible at all. It's just my mind can't switch off from worrying about it.
Yeah.
But it's all very quick and very easy, and I'm very lucky. It's I think of people who are diabetic, they're injecting themselves every day. I'm doing it once a month, so it's not the worst thing in the world.
We've talked about your feet, Adam. I just was interested to know, just thinking about it now, did the pain ever spread anywhere else, or was it predominantly a foot pain?
So it actually did spread quite quickly into my hips and my back. As well. So it's not really ever gone into my arms, particularly knuckles, which lots of people who have arthritis will recognize is always a thing. I think your extremities are the first things to feel the pain. It did make its way up into my back, which I think was probably the most painful, having it in sort of in your spine. Yeah.
And there'll be people who watch or listen to this that have almost nothing to relate to, who've lived their whole lives and been completely pain-free. Can you almost describe the pain? Is it like a burning pain? Is it like just a deep discomfort? Is it a sharp pain? What's it when it's at its worst? What did it feel like?
It feels like you're standing on like daggers, on knives. It feels like you're being stabbed so it's a very localized, severe, sharp pain, which sort of, if you see people who are struggling with pain from arthritis, if you think about it through that lens, you can sort of see them wincing. And that's because they're getting moments of intense pain when they're trying to move or weight bear or whatever they might be doing. But that's how it feels, yeah.
And you talked about the fact that some days you're walking a bit, some days you're on crutches, and at least one day a week you're in a wheelchair. So does that mean that it's quite a bit of a lottery each day as to how bad the pain would be? It'd be sort of quite random.
Very random. For me, I never really saw a pattern. They talk about environmental factors such as the heat, damp, but I never really noticed anything. It would literally be wake up in the morning, try and get out of bed, see what that's going to be like. And like you said, some days it was just a bit painful, and then you sort of push through and use pain medication. And some days I wouldn't even be able to roll over to get out of bed, and then it would be a struggle to deal with all of that and sort of get to the point where I could, and obviously go to work and all those types of things.
Obviously, it's demoralizing. Does it become hopeless at any point where you just think, do you ever just sort of think, I've probably got this for the rest of my life? Like I've kind of hit sort of an old age problem just 35 years earlier than I probably should have, kind of thing. Did it ever get to sort of a doomsday like feeling, or did you kind of just block it out and just try to keep pushing through?
I think that no, it definitely has that effect on. It had that effect on me, where you just feel really hopeless, and you feel a bit hopeless of feeling hopeless. But equally, when you don't have the answers, you're not medical, you don't understand really what's going on, it does feel like, well, I'm beholden to someone telling me whether I can or can't have a medication, and actually this is affecting my life, and there's not a lot you can do about it at that point. So in that respect, it feels sort of hopeless.
In terms of moving on to Parkrun, there was one final thing which I wanted to ask you about, which was really interesting, which you'd hinted at to me about previously, which was you have actually had a period where you briefly came off the medication, and that was sort of almost like a reminder of that this was still there, lying in wait. Sounds a bit dramatic.
Yeah.
But can you just talk me through again what happened, why you briefly came off the medication, and what it was like? Because the pain came back quite quickly.
Yeah. So it was interesting because I'd gone through a period of taking the medication and becoming a bit glib about, well, I don't have any pain anymore. And I got COVID. And because the arthritis drugs I take are immunosuppressants, I had to come off those immediately and move on to the antiviral drugs for COVID. Within a week, I started not being able to come down the stairs in the morning. And within 2 weeks, I was back to sort of not being able to get around again.
That's so fast.
Yeah.
2 weeks is an incredibly short amount of time. You'd like to think, oh, maybe it'll be a few months and then it starts to creep back in. But this thing is like rapidly it's back.
Straight back. And that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that serve as a reminder? Because obviously, like anyone, you could almost start to take it for granted again after a while when you just get used to the kind of, I'm pain free again. Did it kind of serve as bring it back into sharp focus that, I do have this thing, and this injection is actually really important. It's really helping me.
Yeah, it did. And I think it was important because taking immunosuppressants isn't something necessarily to be taken very lightly. So I do have to understand what that's doing to my body, and why I had to come off it whilst I had COVID. And that's an important reminder, but also that it still sits there sort of lying in wait slightly for me, which is sort of something to worry about, but also something to hold on to the good parts that the medication brings sort of a bit more tightly.
Make the most of them, I guess, and appreciate it more perhaps than someone else who hasn't been served with this reminder of that it could look very different. Yeah. Are there any, you don't have to go into too much actual detail if you don't want as much or as little as you want to, but are there trade-offs for doing this injection? Are there any downsides or effects that is the immunosuppressant the main one that you just have to be a bit cautious about getting unwell or anything like that?
I think there are. I think I have to be a lot more careful around people who are ill, and just sort of and that's not so much of a worry. It's just a precaution to take, and I might get colds slightly easier than I used to, perhaps. Although it's a very difficult thing to really judge. There's longer term implications of taking immunosuppressants, but we've spoken about this before, and actually it's a trade-off that I'm really willing to take, because if you map back to what life looked like without them, actually that was sort of shortening of one's life anyway. So sort of have the slight risk that immunosuppressants brings, I've sort of something I'm willing to accept.
It's a sort of worthwhile trade-off on balance when you picture the Adam that can't roll out of bed, is in a wheelchair. Yeah, like you say, it seems like it's very worthwhile for the quality of life it does give you now. So you start to set on a course to lose the weight now, sort of down to 20 stone, and start to tick away at the weight, but also bring the fitness back. And you go to your first park run. I had down that you ran 43.58 on the very first one, which must have been like, that didn't matter. It was just your back and you got round. Yeah, completely. So I think that was Edenbrook, although I can't remember. I think I had it down as Edenbrook.
Edenbrook. So just to get round was a rather wonderful experience. Yeah.
And then from there, your partner suggests that maybe you'd like to look at a beginner's running course, which I think was done with Hook Runners. Yeah. Big club locally, which I guess in a weird way you kind of think, I ran a half marathon. There must be a small part. You have to sort of park your ego to one side and go, well, maybe it does make sense to put that structure in and start to rebuild. What was that experience like going on the beginner's running course? Yeah, so it was really interesting because, as you mentioned, Emma, my partner, she hadn't done running before, but we were keen to do sort of this path together. And
I had only ran, as we'd said, on treadmills, probably hadn't really researched much about how to run or the right way to run. So she'd came across this quite well entitled ABC course, which sort of sounded about right for us. We didn't really know what we were doing. We needed the sort of building blocks. And we both looked at it as actually, if we're going to bake this into our life moving forward, it'd be great to spend the first sort of 6 months learning how to do it properly.
It's laying the foundations.
Yeah. Be safe, not get injured. And whilst it was slightly frustrating, I guess, for me to go back and, running around a school playground in interval training, first of all, fantastic base foundation. And, interval training, something I'd never heard of before, and now obviously that forms part of quite a bit of what we do. But also to meet a group of like-minded people, something that I had done solo before, and not really thought, well, actually, if I found some other people, that would be good fun too. But and those people, some naturally don't go on to run, but actually a good core group from that initial course where none of us knew how to run. And the idea at the Hook Runners ABC is that the graduation is a 5K park run. And whilst we mentioned I'd done one, I'd got round, actually it was about getting round with good form and breathing properly and stretching and doing all the things that are right to do to sort of make sure that you're running for a long time in a healthy way. And so that was a course that went a couple of times a week, and a club that I still run with and get lots of enjoyment from running with people as well. Yeah,
you really start to make quite some good leaps forward after that. I had down that you'd run a 27:47 following the course, which is a massive leap forward.
Yeah,
we've run together at the same park run before. We were at Brooklands. Is that the right name for the one I was with Johnny? It was Brooklands, wasn't it?
Yeah, Brooklands.
Yeah, we were at Brooklands together. What have you got your 5K down to now, Adam?
Brooklands is, I think, my PB, which is 24 and some change, I think.
Yeah. Which is it's just so extraordinary, the world of difference from where you were, and not that long ago. That's what's so crazy. Often when people do tell you about stories about back when they were, whether it be the social lifestyle, very few people have the extremes of talking about the wheelchair level, but certainly in terms of being in a very different place with their health and their fitness. Often they're talking quite a few years back, and it's been this. For you, it's happened really quite quickly in the grand scheme of your life. We're only going back to early 2022 to find this kind of period, and then a lot has happened since then. Do you look back at it and go, "Wow, a lot's happened in this period"?
Yeah, and it's one of those things that. Actually, I'm really pleased I've gone through it.
Why do you say that?
Because so many moments in that short period of time, I've had to mentally test myself. I've had to test my resolve on whether it's making the right healthy choices for what I eat, or making sure I go out on that run, or juggling looking after people versus going out for that run, or going on holiday, and all of those things. And actually, for me, I lean on that when I'm on longer runs. But I think, well, it's only another half an hour, or whatever it might be. Think of all of that stuff that you had to go through to get to this point. An hour more of trying a bit hard isn't, in the grand scheme of things, that hard. So I like to use that kind of body of the last, 18 months, whatever it might be, where there was an intense effort that got put in and focus to kind of help as a springboard to all of the other things that I now want to do and achieve.
I could picture you almost doing another half marathon or something, and if stuff got really tough in that last mile, there's this well of memories that you could almost draw on a little bit to push you through towards that finish line. It's it gives you an extra kind of incentive that other people might not necessarily have, because you've been through this whole experience. That's quite an interesting thought. We sat here in our electric orange Jog On hoodies, Adam, so it would feel silly of me not to bring up Jog On specifically. I know that you'd mentioned on part of your journey coming back, like so many of us, we end up browsing on YouTube and come across some running based content. Do you remember sort of discovering Jog On? And because now you're heavily involved, for people that don't know, you're officially a Jog On ambassador, one of the 13 around the world, which is awesome. And without being boastful, we did have a lot of applications, which was wonderful. And you were one of the final 13. So do you remember when Jog On came into your life, and what it was that you connected with a little bit about it?
Yeah, so I think it was early on in 2022 So with the idea that we're moving towards a place where I'd be pain free, or start to think about that, well, I started to think about, well, what are the options? And like you said, this day and age, YouTube is a very easy place to start to look for those things. There's a fair amount of running content out there, but a lot of it isn't hugely engaging from my perspective. And actually came across Jog On at your channel and thought, oh, this is actually someone having fun with an activity that we say it a lot when we talk to people about Jog On, but connecting people through running, finding a new tribe of people to find new adventures, go out on training runs, get to know, hear about their background. And I really like that kind of community aspect of the content that was being put out on the Jog On channel. Also, very entertaining, story driven, interesting content that actually really relatable as well. I think there's lots of running channels I can aspire to want to be like some of the people on those, and I still watch those channels now, but there was nothing at the time that I connected with quite as much as some of the stuff that you were putting out. Whether it was running around the theme park or running across Wales, all of those things were very kind of interesting to me, and sort of became a real avid watcher of the Jog On channel, and was really keen when a new video came out that Emma and I both would sit down and watch it and get excited.
That's amazing.
That kind of whole old school linear TV waiting for something to come out. It was really good.
Yeah, I love that idea of people. When the few messages I've had about that, which say about, there's a couple of families that will sit down the kids have put their Jog On tops on to watch it, which is a wonderful thing, because I love the idea that it's a bit of an event when it comes out, because the videos aren't weekly, they do come out few and far between, but partly because of the amount of effort that goes into making them and really trying to make them as watchable as possible and to mean as much as possible. And I think I've said it before on this podcast, but in a strange way, I've sort of benefited from not being an elite level runner and being a guy who has had a time many minutes back from what I was, and having gone through weight gain, weight loss, and other things, and for whatever reason, just naturally, as much as I find elite running incredibly impressive and it's amazing, and I'll always sit down and chat to elite people as well, for some reason the level of excitement that I get from watching someone finally break 30 minutes for a park run is on par with watching someone set a world record. It's just, to me, I don't know, I've never quite tapped into it, but it's something about the personal achievement and the striving to do something and being in a position and working really hard and getting to a new level, if you like, almost slightly gamified. It's something I've always found very, very exciting, and it's why some of my favorite videos I've ever done have been like, pacing someone to break their first ever sub 25 5K. And it's not always just, here's this elite person doing this unimaginably fast thing. It's nice to explore all the different levels. So I feel like as time's gone on, I've become more aware of that. I think Jog On has benefited from the relatability of the fact that there's just purely a passion from my part on someone running, whether it be a personal best or just getting around a distance for the first time. There's something enthralling about that, no matter the speed or the ability, just improvement. And improvement to me is exciting. And maybe that's where that comes from. But no, it's been absolutely wonderful having you as an ambassador, Adam, and we'll see where it goes. I know that the southeast of England, for people listening, is a very strong area now. You've teamed up with a couple of other ambassadors, namely Ian and Kerry. There's also Mike Bell, who's just started coming to things, and formed a wonderful group.
As you said, very much in collaboration with Ian and Kerry and Mike, in terms of trying to get a little hub together of people with the support of us in Electric Orange. And if you haven't experienced what that's like, you've got to get along to something, because it's all about having fun and meeting new people, and that's what we want to kind of make that a sort of a bigger event. But we don't want to focus necessarily just on the southeast. We've talked about really wanting to spread the Jog On message across the whole of the UK.
Absolutely.
And we're very lucky that we've got ambassadors in other far-flung places around the world, and want to help support them.
Well, Adam, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. You've got an incredible story that I'm sure many people will not only be shocked and surprised by, because they've never known about this, but also inspired by, and to show that someone can come back from the depths of a wheelchair in a hospital to where you are now, sub 25 5Ks, looking on to do some amazing things with your running, which I guess leads me to my very final question, Adam, which is future plans. You've talked about, I know back in, I remember from your ambassador application, you used the words a possible ultra on the horizon. I know you've been in talks about, is it Isle of Wight? You've been looking at an ultra. Is that sort of something you'd like to do going forwards?
Yeah, so inspired and pushed on by Ian, my fellow Southeast ambassador for JOG On. We are entering the Isle of Wight Ultra next year, which is 100 or so K trot around the outside of the Isle of Wight, which I'm very much looking forward to, and rather in the footsteps of Emma, my partner, who on a rather whim went and did a Thames Par 50K.
I remember, that was amazing.
So sort of just trying to catch up now, and I think 2024 in terms of my aspirations is going to be sort of distance based, longer things. I very, very much enjoy the half marathon distance. I've enjoyed doing that this year, but actually sort of pushing beyond that, finding those mental barriers to overcome. I think in Ultra 2024 is going to be what I look to, and then maybe switch it up again for 2025. And that's the great thing about this kind of sport, is that there's so many facets to it, and like you said, you can lean into one part and then another. That's the goals for next year, is to sort of lengthen out the runs a little bit.
Brilliant. Adam, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for your support of JOG On. I've really, really appreciated it. It's just been wonderful to talk to you, so thank you.
No, it's been great, and I think I've spoken to you about this sort of one-to-one before. Just want to say thank you to you for having the JOG On community, building it in the way that you have, and I think that you mentioned it a minute ago, but there's more than a two-way thing, and it's not just a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is sort of the seed, and actually it's kind of much bigger. And for those people who haven't come along to a JOG On event, really sort of suggest that you do it. It's great fun. You'll meet great group of people who are encouraging, and we are from all walks of life, and we're all different speeds, walking, running, jogging, and I think it's a great community. So thank you for putting it all out there. Really appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thank you. We produce podcast episodes and videos to connect people through a love of running and adventure. Currently at 5.2 million views, go check out the JOG On YouTube channel as well. You can also find the JOG On running kit at thisisjogon.com. I'm Harry Morgan. Go for that run. And this is JOG On.